Carsley's time in the dugout is done at the England men's national team. He won 5 of his 6 games in charge, got England promoted back to Group A, of course, where
we belong.
Exactly. It was a long road.
That was the Arsenal song that no one listened to when they won
Finished
the title. No, it was when they won the title back in the day.
Okay.
Only had a minute and then we went and did it. We're back where we belong.
What in the
They put a single out with the Michael Thomas winner.
Yeah.
They put a single out.
Did they?
Yeah, I said that.
Do you think Carsley should put a single out?
Yeah, I'll come on to that. But about 6 months ago, I insisted that Arsenal put a single out. No, I thought everyone would remember it. No one did. I had to look it up and show everyone.
Can't remember what
terrible.
you never knew.
He went home to get it.
It's terrible. Yeah, I did have to. Lee Carsley should definitely do a single.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, so Lee
All
Carsley.
by myself.
Everybody's got to learn sometime.
Yeah.
Could be that.
So how do you sum up his time in charge of England, this campaign in the Nations League, Luke Moore? What are your takeaways immediately?
My immediate takeaways were that he did the job he was supposed to do. I think the FA could have been a little bit clearer, a little bit more definitive in saying, no, he's only doing it for these camps,
yes.
which he himself did say, but I think there was room, the way the media worked, there was room left for a question mark, which he was then obviously quizzed about and dealt with very badly. Off the pitch, he was a little bit naive for a couple of reasons. One was the national anthem thing, which I thought was ridiculous, but I knew it was always going to happen. And the other thing was whether you're staying on long term, which he gave a lot of confusing answers to. Ultimately, what's come to pass is exactly what we said has come to pass on this show. And the reason I'm mentioning that is not out of some kind of arrogance. It's just because that happens so infrequently on this show that I feel like we should at least signpost it.
Yeah, exactly.
We said on the pitch he'd be good enough. He's obviously a good coach, good tactician, rated. Players like him. Off the pitch, he'll find it difficult. He won't be able to do the ambassadorial part of it, which he hasn't been able to do. But don't want to be negative about it. What I would say, most importantly, is this. He has delivered England back up to the top of the Nations League, which is important. A much derided competition, but as we said yesterday, I think
Not in this studio.
Quite an important one for several reasons. But secondly, he has actually, the Greece game aside, which maybe we'll find some time to talk about, is a little kind of error of judgment, I suppose, from an inexperienced top-level coach. It's totally understandable. He's also been able to lay out a load of players to Thomas Tuchel and say, here's what you've got to work with. He's brought loads of young players in that he's used to working with and that he likes and that he rates and given them a chance. Thomas Tuchel, presumably he's watching these England games, which I know you guys joked about last week. He might not be, but I think he probably was.
Well, I think he would have tried to. Whether he would have been successful.
Yeah. If he could have got his UEFA login done in time, he definitely would have
seen the highlights, the brief highlights.
Seen some of the highlights, yeah. I think he's done a good job in actually quite humbly laying out a load of players and saying, here's what you could use. Here are the players you've got at your disposal. You don't know these younger players as well as I do, so I'm going to show them to you and to the nation and to the world in a way. And so this is what you've got to work with, while at the same time not sacrificing results, which I think we shouldn't think is an easy thing to do, because I don't think it is. Yeah. If you look at the players that played for England in the last game against Ireland, perhaps it's too much of a stretch to say it's unrecognisable to what it was even 6 months ago, but it's very different. Yes. And I think that's an important aspect that he's brought, because he's used his experience of working with those players to say that they can do it at the top level. Thomas, here's what you've got to work with. It isn't just the same old thing. I think if he had chucked a load of players in for all of his games, it was really just a variation on the team that England planned to Southgate in the Euros. You could understand that. You could say, look, he's a custodian. He doesn't feel comfortable in changing too much. When he did change quite a lot at the start of his temporary tenure, we thought it was an audition for the job itself.
Injuries have dictated as well.
Injuries have dictated a bit, but we thought it was an audition for the job itself, when actually what it looks like now in retrospect is just a way of saying, my role here is to protect the results, giving them what they need, but also show the next manager what there is to offer. Yeah,
and we'll talk about that in the second section of today's show, about that sort of handover and what we will expect from Tuchel and so on. Vish, what are your takeaways from Lee Carsley and his time as a manager of England?
I mean, not too different from that. I think the important aspect of his job that Luke has already outlined there was bringing the next generation through, and it was kind of broadly similar to Southgate, given that he had that time in the under-21s. The difference this time around, though, was because of a lot of things that were implemented during Southgate's tenure, there was always a bit more connection with the under-21s anyway. So when he was picking players that he'd work with, let's say Angel Gomez for his debut after the Euros, he was picking him in and putting him in that team in the position that he plays. Mm-hmm. And because there was more continuity over the last few years, it's a more recognisable system for anyone coming through, even us from the outside when we're looking at it. Whether we're playing 4 at the back or 3 at the back, there is a level of familiarity there tactically that I can't really remember. From my time as an England fan, but certainly and I'm talking from my perspective here, being able to pinpoint a scheme that we're putting in place and what the ideal end result is going to be, what the end product will be. And I think he's done that very well. And I suppose it's not surprising, again, as Luke said, because he's a very capable coach. What I did find really interesting as it developed over these few months in charge, and because it was more concentrated, because it was England, was him trying to work out what he wanted from the game, full stop. I think, he didn't necessarily do great when he was put under pressure in press conferences, but I don't think managers tend to until they get more experience of doing that. But it felt like we were watching him work out what he wanted from this coaching
I know
career.
what you mean, yeah.
Because he had a good job with the under-21s. He's going back to that job. And I think when you get pushed to the forefront of, such a big job as this, and you get asked about it, he tied himself in knots. And that's, in hindsight, understandable. At the time, it was a bit chaotic.
Yeah.
But I do wonder where he goes from here, full stop, because being an England manager, being a top manager, full stop, you don't spend that much time on the shop floor. And he clearly really enjoys, being on the training ground, seeing players develop in front of him, helping them develop and stuff like that. And modern management isn't quite like that.
I think that happens in a lot of professions. I think in a lot of professions where you get good at something, you inevitably get moved into a management role or moved upstairs or moved away from what you love doing in the first place.
Yeah,
and I think this is a manifestation of that.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely fine for Carsley to say, I'm a coach. I love working with young players. There's plenty of people out there like that who do really good jobs who don't necessarily get the credit. You think of a Tony Carr, for example, at West Ham, who got the credit much later in his career, but he has been responsible for bringing through so many young players. And there was never, as far as I know, any chat about him becoming a top-level manager or first-team manager. It's not what job he wanted to do. I think the England setup is slightly different, of course, to that example. But if Carsley decides that he wants to go back and do that, that's fine. I just think the FA's communication about that could have been better in the background. Because, Vish, you know how this works better than we do, and you actually are a working journalist. The FA could have been briefing out the back all the time, saying, look, guys, there's no chance he's ever going to take the job. I think the problem is I don't think they knew that at the time. I thought if he steps up and is really impressive, a la Southgate.
And also, if Thomas Tuchel doesn't want it. Yeah, they tried with Guardiola.
Because what the FA have done now is backfilled the narrative. They've backfilled the narrative and said, we always want someone with a track record of winning big trophies.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Which is easy to say when you're the FA, but I think that they probably didn't think that necessarily at the start.
Well, it's easy when you get the name over the line. But no, I think those are interesting comments on Carsley's time in charge. I mean, in terms of him as a man, not too dissimilar to Southgate. Obviously, him and Southgate are different. But when Southgate first took the job, and it does seem that there was that almost sort of reluctant succession plan from the FA when Southgate took over. They couldn't find anybody. And that's why I think there was confusion with Carsley. They thought it could have been the same situation. But in terms of the man himself, I mean, senior Sky Sports news reporter Rob Dorset said of Carsley's a lovely guy, a loyal employee, a humble bloke, and he's an excellent coach. But he wasn't right for the top job going forward at this stage because his FA bosses decided they wanted someone with a track record of claiming big titles at senior level. So that's what we've said. So Carsley, as I said on yesterday's podcast, Bellingham said, he's put a smile back on my face playing for England, which is an interesting comment considering that Bellingham did go to a final at the Euros, but that is a comment about the style and structure of the playing for England. I think that perhaps was less attacking under Southgate, and Bellingham thought they could be a bit more on the front foot.
I think that's also Bellingham's talking specifically there about his disappointment from the summer as well. Quite
possibly as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we do know in the final though there was a couple of moments where he turned around and shouted at the bench, what are we doing, or something like that. We know he's an outspoken character, but I don't want to focus on Bellingham. I want to go back to Carsley here. So Carsley, likeable, he gets on with the players. They've enjoyed working with him. So that's all obvious. That's in the bag. That's safe.
That's safe.
Right. Now, Carsley himself has been reflected on his time in charge, of course, and said, I wanted the England team to be exciting to watch, be attacking, and now people have seen it. Again, talking about what England did in the summer, people will have said in tournaments before under Southgate, but it was such a long era under Southgate, 102 games in charge, of course.
Yeah, I also think it's apples and oranges as well.
It's fine.
The way they were set up in the summer, as we've talked about ad infinitum, is give themselves the best chance to go deep in a tournament, which they did. It's very, very different.
Fine, but when Carsley said that, he is responding when he says, and now people have seen it, he is responding what has been
he's a
going on.
He's a different guy with different ideas about the game.
He wanted them to be exciting. They are his words, and that's in part what they did. He said, he went on to say, it's given the staff and myself the confidence we can do the job. You always doubt yourself, but you have to take the responsibility to do that. And the trust from my bosses has been a massive boost of confidence. That paragraph there suggests to me that he would be open to it in the future. Thomas Tuchel has an 18-month contract, and I honestly think that the expectation is so big now, of course, with England, that the FA, as Dorset has said, as a lot of people have commented, they wanted a proven winner in and right, we've got to get this monkey off our back. What is the best chance we can do that? And they've obviously thought it was Guardiola they courted, and then they've gone for Tuchel now. But I find this interesting with what Carsley has said there, because it's only an 18-month contract, and should England find themselves needing a new manager in 18 months' time when Tuchel, if Tuchel wins the World Cup, maybe fancies staying on. I don't know. But let's say Tuchel leaves, after that World Cup, and he moves on. I think Lee Carsley is a guy that the FA could turn to now. I think he would be the first name I think people would say. But
this is a problem, isn't it?
Unless Guardiola fancies it and there's all that kind of stuff.
This is a problem, though, isn't it,
but the FA now would then go back to that sort of succession plan. And this is what I said at the start. I actually thought the appointment of Tuchel was okay. I know some people said this is ridiculous. You go down one route, say we're trying to grow our coaches, we're trying to hire from within. And I get that. But they've obviously thought, we're not ready for that. Carsley's not ready for that, and so we've got to look elsewhere.
Which is also their own fault.
Fine, but that's the situation.
So
that's the lie of the land. With Southgate, when Southgate took over, just very briefly, when Southgate took over, it was like, we're crap and we need rebuilding. And Southgate was the unlikely candidate, and he managed to do that quite a lot, or somewhat, depending on who you talk to. Carsley took over in the interim at a time when expectation has been sky high. It's been the highest that I've ever known as an England fan.
But I don't think that matters either, Marcus. I think the reason I'm saying what I'm saying is that if they truly think that Thomas Tuchel is the best chance they've got of England winning something, fine. That's up to them to make that choice. But the issue is they never have any succession planning in place. Mm-hmm. And so when you go down the route of promoting from within, maybe the Southgate situation came along exactly as you said it did, through necessity, learn from that. Mm-hmm. Bring someone through, get them ready. Carsley wasn't coached to be ready for the big job for the reasons we've talked about. So what's going to happen next? If you go the other route, not the promoting from within, not the succession planning, where you just go, we're going to go big name, big name, big name. The problem is you're not in control of that.
Yep.
You're only in control of who's available and who wants the job.
Indeed.
So if they're going down the Thomas Tuchel for 18 months route and that's going to be that, of course, there's always a chance of an extension and all the rest of it, and maybe there will be a chance to put a succession plan in. Well, the only person who's realistically going to be able to do it long term after him at the moment is Anthony Barry, who's been the assistant for Tuchel for a while and has been assistant at a lot of big jobs, but has never had a big job before. He's just a well-renowned coach, almost as similar to a Carsley. So,
but what do you think of that Carsley quote when he says, my staff and I, it's given the confidence we can do the job? When you talk about succession planning... Well,
I don't think anything of it, because I just think it's...
But I think that's what the FA are trying to do. Yes, it may well be too little too late or whatever, but this is my point, is I think that they're giving Tuchel the job, and I think that Carsley could well take it after that.
I think you're looking too deeply into that.
And I also think, by the way, it's not a succession plan, because Lee Carsley's already got a full-time job.
Yeah.
So he's not learning on the job because he's doing the under-21s. It's the same problem again. Mm-hmm. Well done, you've had 6 games of experience, you've gone back to your old job for at least 18 months, and then we're going to chuck you into the Lions Den again. He should be alongside the coach, learning the job, the same way it happened with Yogi Love and Hansi Flick and all these types. That is,
Steve McLaren.
Me, Steve McLaren is, well, that's an example of it. Yeah. He obviously wasn't up to it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work as a concept. Just mean that example of it is a poor example of it. They're not thinking long enough into the future. It's almost a bit like, you go on a big long-term diet and you understand it has to, if you want to lose weight, it has to work gradually over time. You just grab one salad and go, well, I'm healthy now. That's what they're doing. They're just going, it was an opportunity, we're taking the opportunity, and fuck, that's what's going to happen in 18 months. But of course, they can't say that because that would be ridiculous.
Well, okay. I think that perhaps it was important, though, to keep that mood in the England camp, which Southgate had fostered, and a similar type of bloke in there who knew the ropes and so on. I mean, Harry Kane was talking about the culture ahead of the Ireland game.
I've said to you 100 times, and I'll say it one more time for the listeners' benefit, because I feel quite passionate about this. If they were serious about this, if they knew what they're doing, we are giving them way too much credit. If they knew what they were doing, as soon as Carsley won that trophy with the under-21s, they should have put him alongside Southgate permanently, not just on opposition scouting or whatever, and said, now you're ready for the job, and stuck with it and supported him. What would have given him confidence would have been FA-sponsored preparation to actually do the job. It's not a succession plan to say, off you go back to the under-21s, which is a full-time job in itself, and then we're finished with Tuchel in 18 months' time, potentially. You can come back in and do the same thing all over again. It's not a plan. It shouldn't be mentioned as a plan because it isn't a plan.
Yeah, and when I say, oh, well, I think that's what they're thinking, I'm not saying, oh, well, that's their grand plan or anything. I think that's just what they're thinking, and I sort of understand that slightly. But you've said what you've said, and it's a difficult one to try and get in the heads of the FA bosses because it does seem a bit of a scattered
Easily get in their heads. They're fucking empty. Loads of room in there.
Well, okay. Well, look, Harry Kane was talking about the culture within the camp ahead of the Ireland game, and he said these are the camps where you build that culture and togetherness, which has been very crucial for the England team.
Totally agree, yeah.
And that's where, well, we're going to talk about Tuchel in a short while. That'll be interesting how that is fostered or dealt with, if you like. But Kane makes a good point. He says it takes a long time to build the culture and maybe not so long to lose it if you're not careful.
Yeah.
And that's something that they've got to be careful with, as Kane said, because it has been a really feel-good factor, by and large, among England for a long time now.
Yeah, and I think I can totally understand what Harry Kane was saying. I do agree with him. I think his objection to the number of players pulling out was probably about right, because it rests squarely with the players. Mm-hmm. You build that culture because you're able to give the players ownership of what the team is, what it means, what it stands for, on the pitch and off the pitch. And we talk about Southgate and his ambassadorial role and how he excelled at that. But ultimately, as soon as it was fun for playing for England again, the players then grabbed it and ran with it. And, for all the, you can say that, some of the England media bits on whether they were in swimming pools, on unicorns, or just laughing and joking, they were doing that because they themselves felt like brothers in arms, because they were aiming to achieve something greater, something that England hadn't achieved in a long time. And with the turnover of staff that you get naturally through any professional sport, particularly the life cycle of this specific England team, it relies upon players taking it forward. And actually, if you I'm not making excuses for the players who pulled out, because I mean broadly I do agree with them pulling out for their specific reasons. But, it's important to have a Kane in there, to have a Bellingham in there, and they were there. And also having those younger players coming in and clearly, loving it. Yeah. Think of someone like Morgan Gibbs-White, who might have felt that he should have had an England call-up before now, but you see his enthusiasm around training, and you see his enthusiasm when he comes on for what he might have regarded in a different era as junk minutes. Yeah. He was still, all action and basically his best self for England. Yeah. And that's not hard to cultivate right now, but it does rely on, I suppose, a degree of continuity with this group of players, because if you're constantly chopping and changing who you're interested in based on, say, specific league form, then you do lose it, because there needs to be a bit of heart, essentially, in what you're doing. And I think that's something Southgate was very good at. It was also something he got a lot of stick for. Mm-hmm. I think of, Harry Maguire as the standout example of someone he just kept picking, but who was a general of his, so he plays into that, I suppose, almost like he had a paternal role within that setup. So I don't know that it's going to be high on Tuchel's agenda. Yeah. Which is why I think, we're going to talk about it in the second half, but I thought it was really interesting some of the things that Carsley says he's going to put to Thomas Tuchel, whether, setting out dossiers and stuff like that of what he's found during his time there. Because I don't think Lee Carsley is going to tell anything to Thomas Tuchel about the tactics of the game or the tactics that he needs to apply to this England team. But he will tell them a lot about the culture and how important certain players are to that. So, yeah, going forward, I think England will be fine to cultivate it. I just don't know that it's going to be high on Tuchel's agenda specifically.
Better news for Harry Kane, though, because obviously a bit annoyed about those players pulling out, is that the statue of Harry Kane that was in storage for, 5 years or something, that cost over £7,000, is due to be unveiled today. It might have already been unveiled as the time of the recording.
It's in London Fields, isn't it?
Well, up there was much discussion as where it was going to be. There was talk about train stations and whatnot, but it's going to be in London Fields in Hackney. Some people have described the statue as the stuff of nightmares.
Hold on, why was it?
And that's in London Fields, by the way, which gets very sketchy after dark.
So make what you will of that, but Harry Kane will have his own statue.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, how underwhelming in the context of talking about football like we do every day, the term £7,000 is. Just seems so cheap. It's basically Harry Kane's. It's basically an hour's work for Harry Kane is how much it's cost.
Yeah, life-size statue.
If it were me and I was that wealthy and I knew it was going to be a statue of me in a place that's important to me, I grew up around there or whatever, I've been there, and I heard someone was doing it, I would obviously be very, very proud. But if I heard they were only spending $7,000 on it, I'd be on the phone saying, I can contribute here. Whatever it is to take the money to improve it, because it's going to be me after all that has to sit there for probably longer than I'm going to be alive. I want to make sure it's good, and I don't think it looks that good.
Yeah, it looks better than, just to remind ourselves of that bust of Cristiano Ronaldo one. You remember that as the gold standard, or the bronze standard.
Remember the one outside Southampton? That was a great one
with the legs.
That was really so good. Yeah,
well, I've never made a statue before. I probably never will in my lifetime. Are the faces just impossible to get right?
I think they might be, yeah.
Do you know I'd have
Dwayne Wade's one recently for the Miami Heat is ridiculous. I just want it's absurd.
Honestly, hand on heart, think Pete Donaldson would be your man to turn to, because he can pull that stuff out of the bag.
He can turn his hand to anything creative.
He can't be trusted. No. That is the.
You said that problem. A bit like Seven, the film. He can pull a head out of a bag.
The materials he uses will be questionable. I don't know how long it would last.
True,
but I think creatively,
it'd be edible. It would be edible. So everyone can have a bite.
Why was it in storage for so long? By the way, did Charlie Kane lose the keys?
Quite possibly.
I think if anyone who's genuinely enjoyed Pete's King Charles ear to celebrate the coronation of King Charles would know what skills the man's got in his locker.
So Harry Kane, yes, we think he will be front and centre for Thomas Tuchel's England, which you can't blame Tuchel for that, because he is England's greatest ever goalscorer. He's one of the finest forwards in the game of football, and has produced moments for England throughout his time. I
was quite surprised by
leading the line.
I was quite surprised by the chat. You two had yesterday about, is Harry Kane going to play much? Is he going to do this?
Well, I was asking the question because a lot of people are asking that question.
I think he's always going to be a part of it. If you're talking about the length of Tuchel's contract, by the time Tuchel finishes his contract, I think Kane will be 33. I mean, he scored 11 Bundesliga goals in 10 games this season.
Thus far.
Yeah. At the time of recording, he's got 5 and 4 in the Champions League. He's scoring consistently for England. I mean, I know that he looks a bit slow, and that maybe he needs to, as Vish was saying yesterday, refine his role somewhat. But if you're not able to get him to do that, and you shouldn't be a top coach anyway. So I think he's definitely going to be part of the squad.
Well, I think that's one of the positives actually of Tuchel taking over, is because he works with Harry Kane, and Kane's season at Bayern last time round, of course, he won he was joint top scorer, wasn't he, at the FIFA Awards, and so on. I mean, it's kind of proven, really. It'll be interesting how he structures the side around him.
I just think that we're rubbish. We talked about it at the top of the show about... No, I'm going to qualify it. We talked about it at the top of the show with regards to the manager. We're quite rubbish as a nation at succession planning generally. It's almost a bit like we don't really fix the roof while the sun shines, which is why I'm so pleased what Ollie Watkins got a start and got a goal.
Yeah.
I would like to see some succession planning, not just with the manager, as I said in quite an animated way earlier.
We've been resting on the laurels of the Victorians and Sir Walter Winterbottom.
Maybe we have. Maybe that's just ingrained within us. But I'd love to see a proper succession be managed for a striker. You said, that's my guy, and I'm going to play him when I can.
Well, that's what
and the goalkeeping situation as well.
Yeah, but that's the little that Lee Carsley did, I think, in his time in charge.
He did as much as he could. I think he deserves credit for that.
And perhaps we should have mentioned that when talking about the Carsley era, and I think that probably will be the case. You know, we saw Trent Alexander-Arnold start at right back for England, which some people were crying out for. Now, whether or not those aforementioned individuals and some others that we're going to mention as well are the guys to win England a World Cup, only time will tell, but you won't know it until you play them. I mean, there has been a fair few players that have benefited from Lee Carsley being England manager. Yes, there has been injuries, but he's still got to pick players. Morgan Gibbs-White, you mentioned him. Angel Gomez, I think, has been a big winner. I think people have been impressed with him.
Well, people have just been introduced to him.
Indeed, they have.
There's many people who follow football but aren't big into it, wouldn't have even known who he was.
Yeah, Noni Madueke is in the conversation now.
Definitely.
I think Saka is probably going to start, and if he didn't, you do have the options of Foden and Palmer there. So it's a stacked area. But the fact is, he's the different profile of player to them. I think Lewis Hall has benefited, and
Morgan
Carsley,
Rogers deserved the cap as well, and he got in there.
But Lewis Hall again with England at left back. I mean, Rico Lewis has played a little bit, but I think Hall coming in, I think we're going to see more of him. And Curtis Jones is another one that Carsley knew very well at the under-21s. Yes, he's had injuries and has been unlucky, but it's one of those players who comes in and you just think, yes, you're part of the furniture now. So I think what he's done for England in that short period of time, I think has been, by and large, to the benefit of the England team. Yes, he's tinkered here and there, and I'll be honest with you, I think under Carsley, one can get a little bit too rose-tinted specs about this because a lot of people wanted something different from Southgate. I don't think England played brilliantly under Carsley. I think they laboured a bit, but that could be, with respect to the Nations League, some players, you're a bit knackered from the summer. You're trying to get your eye into your league seasons with your clubs and so on, and it's like, oh, this again, okay. But England went about their business in Group B and they did it. So I think they've done okay, and I think Carsley has shown other ways in which England can play. So Thomas Tuchel takes charge from the 1st of January. Poor negotiation from Tuchel. Come in at the 2nd of January, man, for crying out loud. Enjoy using. But there we are. He's a professional. His first matches in charge will be in March. We
don't know what they are
yet to know if they're going to be qualifiers or friendlies. They certainly won't be Nations League because Carsley took care of that business for him. So an 18-month contract.
Carsley's Tuchel, you're welcome.
Yeah. But
when he hands him the dossier, or just the first page will just say Nations League promotion.
Done.
The second page, you're welcome.
Yeah.
That's it.
World Cup's all yours, baby.
Yeah.
And that seems to be it. That seems to be the World Cup is what the FA want done and dusted with England, which seems an odd turn of phrase to use. So perhaps I'll say the FA want that major trophy, and they feel Thomas Tuchel is the right man to.
I'd love his first squad to be a load of random German players that haven't been capped for Germany but are England eligible.
No, it's all you need to say is he picks Eric Dyer.
But you know when certain smaller nation managers.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Who can we find that's eligible? We need anyone.
We could tweak some of the regulations. Bring back Musiala.
That's
Come home, boy.
The one we missed out on.
Please.
So yes, Carsley said he prepared a dossier to hand over to Tuchel. Whether Tuchel reads it or not is yet to be seen.
He will.
But it is all about winning, and it's not about succession plans. It's not about promoting youth, etc., etc.
Tell you, here's an idea for you. Maybe you could try doing both.
Yeah.
Maybe you could win something, and at the same time have that person you've got coming next to experience what it's like to win something, and then try and replicate it.
If you want to hear Luke's views on that, just rewind about 20 minutes or something.
Exactly. Yeah. They would have turned off by now.
But Harry Kane has spoken of Thomas Tuchel's mix of fun and focus. He said he gets that balance right of having a relaxed environment when you're not training, with a bit of banter and a laugh and a joke, but when you're on the pitch, it's full focus.
Have you heard about some of his training techniques?
Go on.
You like little ones that, he talks about one of Tuchel's things is problem solving on the field. So when they train, they make the pitch smaller, and so he almost kind of increases the concentration on pockets of space that you need to get out of and whatever.
Is it an escape room or something? Is that what he
sort of, basically?
Right.
But then he also does things where when people are playing these kind of smaller sided games, he will shout out maths problems to them. And so they'll have to give him the right answer while, like, say, playing the pass, or if they're playing like 2-touch or 3-touch or whatever.
He's not doing long division, is he? That's not fair.
Probably not. I with all due respect, I fear for Kane in that scenario. Yeah. But
you don't even know your 3 times table, man.
But it is quite interesting, isn't it? Because I think one of the things I find really fascinating about international football is you have to make sure it's not a chore. And England have done that. And the most successful teams, national teams, do that. And it's something actually that France often struggle with. Mm-hmm. It's been well documented about that. I wonder with Tuchel coming in and just the nature of his, I suppose, the nature of how he goes about his business, I wonder if that will... be a different kind of challenge, be like a new exciting challenge for a lot of these players, because these players all play for very good teams. You don't even need to be at the top tier of the Premier League to have like really engaging training sessions, just because of the managers in the league right now. And so you kind of need to do something different at international level in terms of sparking that extra bit of creativity, just making sure it's not like, I appreciate you've been in training relentlessly for your teams where you're playing in Europe midweek and, 2 Premier League games in 8 days and whatever. But this is going to be a little bit different.
This is why I think it's a challenge. This is why I think, and I know Marcus's point of view is he's probably the best manager they could have got at international level, and it's a good appointment. I totally understand that. I don't even necessarily disagree. But if I was to play devil's advocate, I would say, Tuchel is going to have to do a lot of adjustment.
Yep.
Because he's just not going to have the room that he has to be forensic and to really hammer a tactical style or do all this stuff you're talking about. What we've seen is, it's relative success because they didn't win anything, but what we've seen is England under Southgate really be a holiday from that and being like, we've got good players, we can work on some basic stuff, we can play in a certain way, we can adopt ideas because we're good at, we've got good football intelligence and top level players. But Tuchel's reality at club level has been, as far as I understand it, quite intense, quite tactical, focusing on things like, how they want to build up, how often they want to put the ball out wide, all that kind of stuff. He's just not really going to be able to implement that in any great detail because he's just going to run out of time, particularly with the way the calendar is. So what you're relying on is really his ability to build this atmosphere and build this place to go where people not only enjoy the football, because that's what England has been all about over the last however many years, but can also really ruthlessly adopt quite simple but effective ideas among a whole load of camaraderie. And on that stuff, I'm afraid, based on what I've seen, Tuchel's stuff tends to fall apart after a certain amount of time because it's too intense, quite combative, quite confrontational, etc., etc. If he needs to, so he is going to 100% need to adapt, because if the first couple of camps don't quite go how he wants them to go, say England get a really tough draw in the World Cup qualifying and the first couple of games are stinkers, like away to someone good, and it becomes a little bit intense, do you trust him as a coach to be able to not blow that out of all proportion? Now, some people say it'll work quite well because even if he has a big bust up with a senior player, they all go away for a few months and they all settle down, they work it all out and it's fine. I just think there is a reasonable chance here that in all the excitement about how big a name he is and how big the trophies are that he's won, we might be overlooking what's actually quite a key part of international management.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because one of the reasons Tuchel is such a good manager is ego. And how will he respond to players pulling out because they want to rest up for a big game, or even, having a confrontation with I can definitely foresee a situation where Tuchel is involved in a slanging match through the papers with Mikel Arteta.
Yeah, that kind of thing. I didn't even think about other managers. I was just thinking about players.
Yeah.
With the Kane thing, Kane was very complimentary about him. But I'm always very cynical about that because I think players can be quite simple on that stuff. And Kane's thinking, Tuchel was great for me at Bayern or whatever. And my feeling is, yeah, but you're a top-level pro. You came in for a load of money. You're always going to play. You scored loads of goals. Your experience of that is always going to be positive. If you're on the fringe, you're
not necessarily.
I think it would be. I think it's realistically he was never not going to play.
The money they spent on him to bring him into Bayern Munich.
But he might ask Kane to do different things. Actually, he played to Kane's strengths, and so therefore they clearly.
So that's
clicked.
why he likes him.
Yeah.
Well, indeed, and so but that does count for something.
What do the other players around that he didn't like think about him?
Well, I don't know, but I think with when you say talking about slanging matches with Arteta and so on, I don't know. I think to give Tuchel a bit of credit, I think maybe if he was Germany manager in his own country, he might be a bit more mouthy and a bit more relaxed. I don't know. But I think as England manager, he'll be well aware of the fact that, I mean, this is not my opinion, but some people won't like the fact that it is a German guy in charge of England. Some people, it's just simply a foreigner.
We've already seen the tabloids' reaction to it.
Yeah, and some people think, as I think we by and large in this studio, that it should be the best of your nation versus the best of that nation and so on. And, you know, maybe some of the smaller sides, fair enough. So I understand the point, it shouldn't be a foreign manager. But anyway, we talked about that. But I think with Tuchel, you can look at it that way, but you can also say, well, how would the players react? You're talking about, we mentioned Bellingham earlier. He plays at Real Madrid. Some of them play for Manchester. They play for huge teams. They've played under some of the best managers around.
That's a really important point. You don't want to drop off at international level too much.
Indeed. And if Thomas Tuchel is announced as England manager, whatever one thinks of lack of planning with the FA and all that, you've talked about that. And I don't really disagree too much with you, to be quite honest. But we are where we are. That is a statement that they're trying to make, that we are serious and we want to win a trophy now. How does Jude Bellingham and Phil Foden and all the rest of it, how do they respond to that? They go, bloody hell, they mean business.
That's
right,
point,
it's time to step up. And I think that they could get a shot in the arm. And I think from that, and I think under Southgate, his time had come to an end, and maybe one or two of the players were kind of like, come on, we can offer a bit more attacking football, whatever. Some people, if Carsley had have got the job, some people say, oh, is that a bit too cosy? Is that too... You're always going to get criticisms here and there. Again, it's how you look at it. And I think with Tuchel coming along and Kane talking about he's got a direct approach, you will be left in no uncertain terms what he thinks. Of course, that can rub people up the wrong way. A bad conversation can spoil things and so on. Tuchel's going to have to be on best behaviour. But so are the players as well. This is not turning to Fabio Capello, by the way. When they turn to Capello, you know, an absolute legend of the game and so on. But unfortunately, Capello thought that international football was a serious business and no fun should be had. Tuchel is not that. This is not like we need someone radically.
You basically almost talk about a different era now, anyway. I mean,
yeah,
15 years ago.
Indeed. But you're not talking about we didn't like what was going on before. Players were too comfortable. Blah 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 blah. It's can Tuchel keep that going? And I think
I do want a bit more drama though. I want a couple of players frozen out. I want people having to come cap in hand.
Any names, Vish?
For the Ramble, that's fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
We're happy with that.
Yeah. England's sacred, though. So what are the areas that Tuchel needs to address then in terms of England on the pitch? We can talk about the camp and all the rest of it, and that's fine. But it's ultimately on the pitch where they'll be judged. And we're thinking that he will play with Kane up top. Any talk of Kane perhaps, you know, giving way to Ollie Watkins, should Ollie Watkins play? That's what he's going to do. It would be extraordinary to think that he wouldn't do that. It's then a question of what do the other players do around him. So we've seen Bellingham in an advanced role.
So I think his job is manifold, and the most important parts of it on the pitch itself are managing the situation with someone like a Kyle Walker at right back, who's clearly a declining force. Who you're going to play instead of him, how you're going to manage that transition, settle on who your centre-backs are going to be. I would suggest should be Stones and Gay.
Yep. I think you'd have too many arguments with that.
With possibly Konsa as a backup or whatever.
Branthwaite maybe, yeah. But who would take your pick?
Yeah. And then obviously the left-back problem has been a problem for a while, mostly due to injury. But he can't go through 18 months of not having
waiting for Luke Shaw.
Yeah. So he's got to sort that out. And he's also, over and above that, he's got to sort out the how he best blends the massive amount of attacking players. Yeah. Those are really the two problems.
I mean, there's that midfield blend that it will be Rice and Bellingham and one other. How you structure it will...
He's played three at the back quite a lot at Chelsea, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He did play three at the back, but he played four at the back quite a bit at Bayern. So I think he will... Again, I think that is that pragmatism which the FA, I think, are quite intrigued by. But it is a question of, I mean, we're not that far away from Gerrard Lampard's Scholes territory here when we talk about Foden, Palmer and Bellingham. Bellingham is surely going to be a starter. Where in the midfield you put him, I don't know. But Bellingham seems to love playing for England. He's putting in
40 caps already at 21.
It's incredible. But the type of player he is, I think it would be unbelievable to think that Bellingham would be on the bench. Whereas you could see Foden coming off the bench and Palmer coming off the bench, which seems mad. I know, but you can't play everybody. But
I think it's much more likely that Foden will start coming off the bench.
Well, and but at Bayern and the way Kane likes to play, you talked about, it's a bit congested if Kane comes back. You could have Kane coming back, as we've seen, if you have runners beyond him. It's obviously, Son at Spurs, Sterling for a while at England. Gordon could play that role. Does he try and get that kind of tune out of Saka? These are the things that he's going to be looking at and trying to deal with, because if you do go with Kane, that does impact Palmer, Foden and one or two of these other players, how they set up. So it will be a challenge for Tuchel, because there's a lot of players in there, massive players, who will have their egos as well, and or their competitive edge, however you want to word it, and trying to keep all them happy as well, and the media, because if you do bench Cole Palmer, people will be like, well, hang on a minute, why are you?
There's also not.
You do going to bench him. There's a lot to be dealing with there.
There's also not a trust the process kind of way you can say it either, because he's only got an 18-month contract.
Yeah.
So the pressure will be much more intense. They should breeze through qualifying whoever they get.
Yeah.
If they don't do that, the pressure will become so intense.
Yeah, although if you are Thomas Tuchel, he could hang his employers out to dry, and just basically any time people say, well, what are you doing, Thomas? You go, well, they hired me.
Yeah.
You know what I bring. You know what I mean? So that would be an interesting...
I am German. I don't think he'll say that.
That would be great, wouldn't it? We asked the Ramble faithful for their thoughts on England at this point and what they want to see from Thomas Tuchel. So we had this from Carl Bridgewood. Has Lee Carsley given Tuchel a big advantage in giving a lot of the younger, more inexperienced lads debuts and getting them more used to the international football setup despite the League B standard opposition? That could make it easier to drop more experienced players from the squad. We have sort of talked about that a bit, but more directly so, Luke. What do you think?
I would say yes. I think that given what I've just said before the break about the intensity of only having an 18-month contract and not being able to use a kind of quote-unquote trust the process defence, Carsley's done Tuchel a big favour, because he's done quite a lot of the work for him. He's as I said yesterday as well, he's been able to show that these are the players I've brought in, this is what they can do, I trust them for this reason. You can have a look at them now in competitive games, and it will make his job easier. In terms of will it make it easier to drop more experienced players from the squad, I mean, I don't, as we've also said in a slightly different context, I don't think Thomas Tuchel will have a problem doing that anyway. I think, and by the way, also, we can't be too precious about these things. I don't want to sound too Roy Keane, but as I always say, loads of players over the years at club and international level have suffered from the idea of a new manager coming in and not quite liking them. It's just how it is. They've fought so hard to get to where they are, being not fancied against players who also play in their position at their own club, for the most part. They do understand, I think that's part of the job. It's just higher profile because it's England. Tuchel should come in and absolutely pick the best squad he thinks, give him the best chance of winning the World Cup, and Carsley's just given him a load more data to work with. So the answer, I'd say, is yes. I
mean, it's hard to disagree with that, Vish, but give it a try.
No, I don't disagree with that. I think, as I said earlier in the show, that I think bringing those players through and putting them in their primary positions, little things like Lewis Hall, I mean, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. Play a fucking left-footed left-back. But, there's suddenly like an extra solution there, another solution. You have a sample of him in
an England shirt, things like that.
Yeah, but even then, I don't think that's all important. You could argue that actually the biggest advantage Carsley has given Tuchel is what he's done before actually taking this temporary job in terms of his work with the under-21s.
Yeah, it's all part
of it. The way
the
players have come through, the fact that all those young players who might be ousting senior players are playing key roles for Premier League teams, and there's a lot to be said for that. And we're in an era where it feels like the available pool, where you'd have no qualms putting them into an England squad, let's say for starters. I don't feel like it's been deeper or bigger than it has been in quite some time, because these players are given responsibility at their respective clubs. So I think, it's on Tuchel to come in and actually probably be a bit more ruthless, really. But I think Carsley and the general England setup has him in quite a good space.
So he's got to also make sure that he picks the best blend, as I said, that gives England the best chance of winning the World Cup. And he needs to absolutely be ruthless, I think, because I kind of feel like, is it the case that Kyle Walker's carrying on playing at international level because he wants 100 caps, right? Because he's on 93. Is it the case that Harry Kane's saying what he's saying last week because he wants 100 goals? That's all fine. They should be personally ambitious. But Thomas Tuchel's job is to say, I don't give a fuck about that.
Yeah.
I give a fuck about winning games. And if you get to 99 caps and you get to 99 goals and we win the World Cup and you're personally disappointed for that, I don't care. So he's got to find that balance as well. He's just got to pick the best players for the best job, because I just don't think we can fall back into that habit of these kind of no-brainer picks for the squad. Paul Scholes said himself, didn't he? This is maybe Paul Scholes being harsh on himself, but he said, part of the reason I retired from international duty is because I was getting picked when I wasn't playing well, and I didn't think I should be in there, and it was uncomfortable for me. We can't get into that kind of thing again where people are just automatic picks.
This from Joey. How different would your starting 11 be now compared with who you would have selected to play in the Euros final? Would you all still have Kyle Walker in the starting 11? We've obviously touched on that there. And have players like Curtis Jones shown he could be a regular starter? Yeah,
Why don't you answer that one, Marcus?
Well, okay. I think that I think it would be slightly different, but to be honest, not worlds apart, actually. I mean, I still would have Kane up top. I think I would still have Saka on the right. I'd probably go with Gordon on the left, which we was kind of crying out for.
In the Euros anyway.
In the Euros, yeah. I mean, unless Grealish has an amazing time, you are thinking along those lines. The difficulty is I would like to see Bellingham given a go next to Rice in the midfield to see if you could get Rice, Bellingham and Foden or Palmer in there. I think
so for me, it would be Bellingham alongside Rice, as I said before.
Yeah.
And I'd probably have Palmer in there.
Yeah. And that is what I would like to see, and we've not seen any of that really. I know against Greece, but it was all over the place.
But it's funny how quickly things can change in football. So you've got to be a little bit careful worrying about that, because I know it sounds crazy, but given that the first England games under Tuchel aren't going to be for 4 months, I should remind our listeners in this context, Ivan Toney come off the bench in the final against Spain. Yeah. Right? He's nowhere now.
So I think
things change very quick.
But I think if we're talking about the here and now, which is Joey's saying, is what about this moment in time compared to the Euros final? The thing is, I think Curtis Jones would be a brilliant addition to that midfield. So if you are going to go for Rice, Jones, and Bellingham, and I am sold on Bellingham in that midfield, I know some people might say, well, actually, could you have Foden in there and then Bellingham off the back? That's what I think. Joey's asked us.
And he's got solve problems at fullback, so you probably wouldn't. I mean, you can't anyway.
Yeah, I'd give Lewis Hall a go at left back. And
your right back is probably going to go with Trent, you'd have thought, if he's fit.
Do you know what? I'd still probably have Walker, I think.
You are so conservative when it comes to England. You want to stick with players for a long old time, you?
No, because I think he's the best right back, that's why.
You haven't watched him the last 2 months then?
Well, but I think Trent is still suspect at the back, and I think if you want to go deep in tournaments, I think that's probably not it. But anyway, that's what I would think. I long for Reece James to get over his injury problems and so on, if I'm honest with you. The man who Kyle Walker himself said would usurp him as England's right back. But I like Curtis Jones in that midfield, and I think having another proper central midfielder in there, like Kobbie Mainoo at the Euros, that's the thing. To think that you'd have Foden and Palmer on the bench, I think is quite crazy. So
I think Andy summed up what Curtis Jones brings now quite well last week.
He did.
Talks about him becoming like a more complete midfield player, which in itself can bring its own problems, right? Because then you start to think, we can play all these different places and do all these different roles. Where we're going to put him, and you almost get another problem on top of the ones you've already got with finding that balance with Bellingham and Foden. He's got a lot of things to solve.
I would still, though, if I'm going to sort of nail my colours to the mast, I would still probably start Foden ahead of Palmer, though. I think Palmer is a wonderful player, but Foden's bigger game experience, that's what I would probably go for. I think Palmer, he's scoring a lot of goals, of course, against a lot of teams, but against the bigger opposition. Now that we said this, didn't we, the other week in the Premier League when it would have been Arsenal who basically marked him out the game. It's like, right, these are now problems and situations you've got to overcome. If you can do that, then But I'm saying this he
did change the semi-final and final though when he came on, Palmer. I think we should consider them as big games.
I think Palmer's ahead of Foden in the pecking order at the moment.
Yeah, certainly for me anyway. Yeah.
What about this from Nick then, to round off, Marcus? I'll read this one out so you guys can have a go at it. What do you guys think about Harry Redknapp's comments where he said that John Terry, Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard are the, quote, obvious candidates to replace Thomas Tuchel when he leaves in 18 months' time? Harry Redknapp said it was obvious that Carsley was the FA's first choice to replace Southgate as well, but he fluffed his audition and that he's, quote, not cut out to be England manager.
Redknapp doesn't have Carsley's number, does he? He doesn't know him.
No, he's not related to him, doesn't know him.
Before I bring you guys in, quick, potential hot take from me, I suppose. I wouldn't, in theory, be against say, Frank Lampard taking the job in 18 months' time if the FA did what I said at the top of the show they should do and say, show us how much you want it. Fuck your media commitments. Fuck all the other business interests you've got. If you want to do this job, sit at Tuchel's knee for 18 months, learn as much as you can. Bear in mind, he may have his contract extended, so you may have to wait another year, and then you'll be the next guy cab off the rank. I'm not against that.
No, I'm not. Well, I've often touted as Lampard as a future England under-21s manager with a possible view if see how he gets on. They're not obvious candidates to me, Harry.
I would say, and I'm not saying he's close to doing it, and I'm not saying he could ever do it, but just out of principle, I would say that Wayne Rooney's closer to it than Terry and Gerrard.
I'd say Michael Carrick might even be closer to it.
Because they're actually going out there and doing stuff. And you hear how Wayne Rooney speaks about management. He at least speaks about it with a maturity and an understanding. I think he's overly harsh on himself, Rooney. He says, look, the reason I'm going to be a Plymouth manager is because as a manager I'm nobody, and I've failed in the past, and I need to show that I can do it.
I'm nobody, they're nobody.
Yeah, I mean the only one who's
where is Plymouth again?
The only one who's done really something out of the norm would be Gerrard, of course, and what he did at Rangers.
I think that's a little bit unfair on Terry. Terry is now back at Chelsea in an academy role, so he's trying to, I'm
talking about at first team level.
Sure,
but a million miles away from.
No, sure he is, but the point of. Or rather, we're probably giving Harry Redknapp too much credit for his comments here, but we're talking about Marcus, you mentioned there about Lampard maybe doing the under-21 role. I feel like if there was that pathway in place, as Luke said, where you do under-21s, then you're with the main manager, and then you're groomed as a successor. If there was that pathway, then you'd think some of these managers, those names, Gerrard, Lampard and Terry, would be prime for that, because you're giving them.
Perhaps they have been offered and they don't want it.
Well, I mean that's the other thing.
You've got to earn the right. I think you have. This is the England national team, right? I understand if Frank Lampard doesn't want to go in at Brentford under Thomas Frank for 18 months. No disrespect to Brentford, I just picked him out of a hat. They're a middling Premier League team. Maybe he doesn't want to do that. This should, as Harry Kane said, or as Southgate actually more accurately said a while back, if you achieve something with England, it trumps everything you'll ever do with your club. Frank Lampard should know that. If anyone was going to go in there under Tuchel and kind of learn the ropes in that way of those names listed from Nick and Harry Redknapp, I would pick Lampard.
I would as well.
Yeah, so there you go.
But it doesn't seem
seem that likely, does it?
No, it doesn't seem that obvious to quote Harry Redknapp. No. Well, there we are, everybody. Thank you very much for listening to the Football Ramble, part of the Acast Creator Network. Vish and I will be back tomorrow alongside Andy and Pete for our final international roundup.
It's bittersweet, isn't it? No more international football for ages.
Better to have loved and lost, though. Do follow us on X, at Blue Sky, TikTok and Instagram at Football Ramble, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your pods.
I hate it when you have to do all that really exciting Premier League stuff over the Christmas period.
Thanks very much, Luke.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vidushan.
Thank you, Lee Carsley.
And indeed, we thank him very much so. See you tomorrow.
Thank you for watching a clip from the Football Ramble podcast. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss an upload. A single upload. Don't miss out on the uploads. The uploads are important.